Hi everybody, Chris Henderson here from Northern Tribe Outdoors. And today I want to make a little bit of a video that I've been wanting to make for a while, but just to share with you some of the tips we've learned over the years in calling widgeon. Now, most people, when they hunt widgeon, it's a bonus bird. It's the bird that comes around. You got most of your mallard decoys are out there. You maybe throw a couple of widgeon in here or there, and it's neat when they come in because of the way widgeon work, and so you throw it out there. But for us, we're hunting tidal mudflats, and so for us, widgeon are the game. 85% of the birds we take are widgeon. And so we've kind of become widgeon hunting specialists because that's the game where we're at in our spot. And so we have large flocks of widgeon decoys, and we just have 2 or 3 mallard decoys out there, and that's kind of how we hunt. So that means that we call probably a little bit different than other people call when they're calling widgeon. So I thought I'd share some of the tips about how we call and how we use our widgeon calls. So the first tip that I have for you is basically how to select a call. Now, shameless plug, we make a widgeon call. But there are all kinds of widgeon calls, and I'm sure a whole bunch of them work just fine. The thing about our call and why I like our call, it's patterned off of a call that's no longer in production. It was the call that I actually patterned it off of was probably around the 1940s, and I happened to find one in the marsh one time, and it instantly became my go-to widgeon call. And I tried to buy one for my son, and we couldn't find one anywhere, and we had to actually end up a buddy found one in a garage sale one time, and he picked it up for me because he knew I was looking. So I thought, you know what, we need to bring that back a little bit. So I changed a few things and kind of brought it up to where we are today. I 3D print them, and they're rugged, but they're real cheap, and that's the key. And so whatever widgeon call you have, a couple of things about the call that you need to think about. One, some of those calls, they just are one single piece. You put your finger in there or whatever to make different calls. And what I would say about them is they produce a little bit of a rasp, which is a good thing because widgeon makes that sound. But I think that's kind of like the top of a topwater bass plug. You know, the bass only sees the bottom of the plug, right? And but the top part is for the fishermen, so they paint them all kinds of fancy colors the bass never sees. And I think some of that rasp is for that, because the thing about the call, it needs to be able to be loud. We call widgeon a lot. In fact, when you listen to widgeon out in the field, they're calling all the time. There's very few times when they're just silent, especially if they're in a group. And so it needs to be loud. And when you use some of those other calls and you start putting a little bit of volume in, a little pressure behind it, then all of a sudden they get real distorted and they stop sounding like anything other than a bird screaming. I think you end up kind of more like a seagull than you do a widgeon. And so I wanted to be able to call loud because we're on these tidal mudflats where we hunt. And so those birds are coming from a long ways off. We see them from a long ways off, and we need to start getting their attention, letting them know, hey, there's a flock of feeding widgeon down here. So you need to make sure your call can be loud. The MTO widgeon whistle, you can put quite a bit of pressure, quite a bit of volume in it before it starts getting distorted. And that's really important, and one of the things that we think is a real good feature on it. You'll notice that it's got the ability to slide. If you purchase one of these, then it'll be locked in place. You can loosen up that set screw and make it slide all over the place. And people do that because they want to be able to do the the pintail trill, that kind of sound. I'm not a pintail specialist. We can only shoot one of them anyway, and so that's just really not very important to me. So I usually lock my call down. This one I'd let go loose, and you can do that. But then you're also playing the trombone thing sometimes. And so you want to be able to grab your whistle and be able to have it set right at widgeon if you're not messing around with it. Now I mess around with it, and you'll hear that on some of our hunts. Sometimes my widgeon whistle too high or too low, and then I'll adjust it real quick to get it right where I want it. But for the most part, you're probably better off figuring out the sound you want and then just locking that thing in place so that it's right in that place. That'll allow you to make the two calls that I think are probably most important if you're hunting widgeon. That is your widgeon call and your teal call. That just that little peep, you can make that and not have to worry about that. If it's all locked down. But your call needs to be able to get loud, and that's the first tip I have for you is make sure you have a call that you can actually blow loud. Not just that little quiet widgeon whistle that's a confidence whistle that the birds hear when they're already basically in the decoys. Once again, I think that's pretty much kind of the top of a topwater plug. It's more for the hunter, less for the birds, but we want to hunt the birds, and so that's what our calls do, is they're able to get pretty loud. And so pick you out a good call. A second tip I would say is basically the basic sounds that a widgeon makes. You have your basic sound, which is just your widgeon whistle. Now, when a widgeon is all by himself, he will make that call, and then there'll be space in between it, and he'll make that call, and he'll be space in between it. He's calling for a mate. He's all by himself. He's not competing with anyone. He's just wanting to do that. Now, if you're hunting widgeon as a bonus bird, and you're out there and you got maybe 2 widgeon decoys in your decoy spread, and you might throw that out there once in a while as spice because you're bored. But when we're hunting, we're going to be calling more like a flock of widgeon. We want to sound like more than one widgeon. And that means that our widgeon calling probably sounds a little bit foreign to some of you because we're calling a lot. So in the description of this video down below are a couple of videos that I think are really helpful in understanding why we call the way we do. They're just people that recorded some great widgeon sounds, some widgeon that were in, I don't know, a public park or somewhere that were calling, and you kind of get a sense of the variety of calls that a widgeon makes. So you got your basic call, the and you get the tone that sounds right to your ears. Sometimes they're lower, sometimes they're higher. And in the field, that's absolutely true for different ducks. Different ducks have different voices, and so you get it to where you like it, and then kind of lock it in there and set it there. But you have that basic call, which is that hoo hoo hoo, and you make that with this call by putting more pressure, less pressure. You blow a little bit harder, it gets a little higher. You blow a little bit lower, and you let it off, and it gets a little bit lower. And you want to try and get the cadence right. It's listen to widgeon. That's the key, right? It's just a. But you'll also notice by watching those videos that I linked down below that the cadence isn't just one cadence. They have that call in different ways when they're competing for food and things like that. So when we sound like a flock of widgeon, we want to have that all in there. And then what we're trying to also replicate is having the widgeon calling over the top of each other. So multiple birds calling over the top of each other. And here's kind of what that sounds like. And what we're trying to do there is we're trying to make it sound like there's 5 or 6 or 7 or 10 or 20 birds in here, and they're calling over the top of each other. Why? Because they're eating food, they're stealing food from each other, and also they're just throwing out little highballs to the ones that are flying by. And so they're making that noise. When you listen to a flock of widgeon, that's the kind of noise that you hear. So we want to replicate that. So we're not just doing a single call and waiting, a single call and waiting. We're calling a lot, and we don't stop calling. If there are birds in the air that are kind of checking us out, we keep calling, and we make it sound like, hey, this is the place that you want to be, because we are in here eating and it is dandy, and we're talking about having us a little party up in here. And so that's what you want to try and simulate with your widgeon call, not just single call. Now, if you do that, you always have to respond to the birds. You do that and they just flare from you, then slow it down, stop, do a little bit less. But for the most part, that's what you're going to hear us doing. There you go. There's also a second thing that I do when the birds are coming in, because a lot of times, you know, when you're hunting and you're using a mallard call, you want to call at the wingtips, you want to call at the butts as they're moving away and try and turn them, that kind of thing. But when they're coming in face on, you're not blowing highballs in their face. Well, when it comes to calling widgeon, you want to keep their attention. When they're focused in on your decoys, if you just stop calling, they'll call down to the decoys. If you're not responding back to them, they'll think, hey, something's up, because widgeon are a really social bird. And so they'll think something's up and they'll bug out. So you got to keep their attention. So you're going to keep calling. But one of the things I do is I'll do just kind of this. It's a It's not the real high whoo. It is just this little kind of da 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 da. It's almost like a feeding call, but what it is simulating just multiple birds that are talking, that are chattering, and it just keeps the bird's attention as they come into the decoys. So that's pretty much the pattern that we use when we use these widgeon calls. Here's a couple of sequences where you can see how we were calling and how we were doing that. One other tip that I would give is if you are hunting in the fog, whether you are hunting widgeon or you're hunting mallards, you're hunting whatever you're hunting, you know, I see people standing out there in the fog and they're not calling. That can be because if you're blowing a mallard call and you're blowing a high ball in the fog all the time, you know, that kind of thing, sometimes that can get real old, and actually it can drive birds away because they're looking at it going, nah, I don't think that's real. But I can tell you that the thing about a widgeon call is it doesn't spook birds. You can just blow it all the time. And so when we're in the fog, we're throwing a widgeon call every 10 to 15 seconds. We're just always going, you know, we'll wait a little bit and throw another widgeon call out there, because that's what the widgeon are doing when they're in the fog. And with these calls, it's broadcasting it out there, saying, "Hey, there's a group of widgeon right down here. You can't see them, but we're down here." And rather than having this highball mallard call, even if they're close in, it's not going to flare them. Because when you're calling, if you're in the fog, you can't see the birds, you blow a high ball and all of a sudden they're buzzing out because they were real close. Well, if you're blowing a widgeon call, you're probably not blowing them out. They're going to hear that and they're going to, oh, okay, they really are right here. So that's an example of maybe blowing that call often and frequent when you're in the fog or even in nasty weather. So, you know, basically that's it. That's what we do. You know, we have that basic call. We put them together, cram them together, go over the top of each other. Because we have multiple callers, we can really do that effectively and look like a group of birds and sound like a flock of birds. And that's our goal. And then just use it right in the right situations. Listen, calls are not going to make a terrible spot the X. Calls are not some magic wand. There's something that you got to learn to do and learn to read the birds. But it's one of the joys of duck hunting that we particularly enjoy. It's just the art of using a call, using decoys to get the birds to come in and work in. You know, we're not into just get them to swing close enough and pass shoot them. That's not our game. We really want to see the birds coming in and working in. Locked up widgeon, that makes me happy. So my hope is you grab yourself a widgeon call, whatever call you use. You know, we'd love to give you one of ours, but whatever call you use, when you use it a lot, use it loud, and use it in the right situations, and you're going to have more success on those big flocks of widgeon if that's what you're targeting. So I hope these tips are helpful to you, and you know, write some comments in this video and let me know if there's some things that you do that you call widgeon specifically and you do a little bit different. Boy, that's great. There's all kinds of different ways to skin this cat, and but this is you know, some tips from us. So that's all for now, and I hope your game strap gets heavy as you whack some widgeon. Have a good one.
Cut him. I only got one out of that. Are you kidding me? Oh my goodness. Oh,